In September 1938, Irving Berlin boarded the SS Normandy at Manhattan's Pier 88 on the Hudson. He sailed to England to be at the London premiere of a new film, Alexander's Ragtime Band, built around several of his songs. He was at the top of his game, his life a model of the Lower East Side rags to riches legend. He was born Israel Berlin in Belarus in 1888. Fleeing the pogroms, his father, a cantor, brought the family in steerage to New York City when Israel was 5. They settled in a cold water flat. In his youth, he spent a year sleeping in a Bowery flophouse while working as a singing waiter in the Pelham Cafe and other Chinatown dives. He wrote his first published song with the piano player in the Pelham in 1907, now calling himself Irving Berlin, and earned 27 cents in royalties. He had his first bona fide hit in 1911 with Alexander's Ragtime Band. He never learned to read or write music and used only the black keys on the piano. But after 1911, a year rarely went by without at least one big Irving Berlin hit. In May 1934, Time put him on its cover. He had arrived. He was in London, staying at Claridge's, when Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich, where he had pledged that England would not intervene if Hitler annexed the Sudetenland, the supposedly German western half of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain called the non-aggression pact symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again. The songwriter was not so sure about that. He came home concerned about the storm clouds he believed were gathering over Europe and wanting to write a new song about how thankful he was to be an American. Then Kate Smith's manager asked him for a patriotic song she could sing on her November 10th radio show to celebrate the first officially observed Armistice Day on November 11th. With a string of hit records and 2 popular radio programs, one daytime and one at night, Smith was at the top of her game as well. In the fall of 1938, she was as representative of old-fashioned American values as baseball and apple pie. If anyone could put over a new patriotic song, it was Kate Smith. Berlin still didn't have a new one, but he remembered a song he'd written 20 years earlier and set aside, what they called on Tin Pan Alley a trunk song. It was God Bless America. He dug it out, updated the lyrics, and gave it to Kate Smith. What happened with the song after that is interesting enough that an entire book has been written about it. Cheryl Kaskowitz's God Bless America, published in 2013. The version Kate Smith first sang on the radio differed in a small but very telling way from the one we know today. It included an introductory verse in which Berlin specifically referred to the troubling signs he had just seen in Europe. It went like this: "While storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful that we're far from there as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer." Did you catch that third line? Let us all be grateful that we're far from there. In this version, God Bless America wasn't only a patriotic song, it was an isolationist one. Thank God we're far from all that stormy business over there in Europe. It was a very common American sentiment. Americans had gotten involved in the Great War late and with great reluctance. Many Americans saw it as a squabble among the old crowned heads of Europe that had nothing to do with America. The appalling, pointless barbarity of it was deeply demoralizing to most Americans. Many, in a sense, experienced shell shock. So, from the end of the Great War through most of the 1930s, virtually all Americans, 95% in some national polls, were isolationist. Left wing and right, college kids and gray bearded veterans, Charles Lindbergh, and even Eleanor Roosevelt, they all agreed that if the world ever went to war again, the United States must not get involved. Kate Smith shared the opinion. She'd spoken out before about not sending American boys, quote, to fight other nations' battles. But timing is everything. On November 9th, one night before Smith's broadcast, Nazis and their supporters throughout Germany and Austria began the rampage known as Kristallnacht, smashing and burning Jewish shops and synagogues and arresting some 30,000 Jews for deportation to concentration camps. The New York Times reported it on the front page the next day. On her daytime show, Smith called it a night of terror for German Jews. Smith sang the introductory verse that night, but both she and Berlin were already reconsidering it. When the sheet music was published in February 1939, he had changed the wording, "Let us all be grateful that we're far from there," to "Let us all be grateful for a land so fair." When Smith's recording came out shortly after that, the introduction had been cut altogether. That's the way it's usually been sung ever since. Its isolationist roots forgotten. As for the SS Normandy, it would catch fire and capsize at Pier 88 in 1942. There were the inevitable conspiracy theories that Nazi saboteurs had done it, but they were never proven.